Dear students, so welcome back. And well, I thought I'll talk a bit about lecture 4 today, the law of neighbors. Now, this is the one particular lecture that um, didn't really go through. Yeah, we had all these problems with the epidemic coming out and the March schedule going haywire. And so, well, here we are. Of course, it's all in the Moodle lecture notes, but I thought maybe I could speak about some things. Um, in this particular series about lecture 4, I want to clarify also that you should be careful about certain things. I will be talking about some case laws and some other material which will be very important from the exam point of view. So please pay attention to that as well. So we talk about the law of neighbors, and today I'll spend some time on servitudes. This is a situation which everybody faces, and it's regarding how we interact with neighbors. And well, you know how it can be. Some neighbors are fun, some are a pain, and we are stuck with them. We really can't do much. And this is what property law tells us as well. So, a lot of disputes that come up in this regard could be, um, for example, you need to get access to your land, or your client needs access to his or her land, and to do that, the road goes through somebody else's land. And so, well, not all neighbors are sweet and nice. Some of them can be quite horrible, and that's how disputes arise. Well, when we talk about disputes, of course, we must understand that there's a dispute and then there is a legal dispute. And for a legal dispute, you would need a legal problem which requires, a sort of legal intervention. So these disputes can be about all sorts of things, whether it is electricity cables, whether it is noisy neighbors, whether it is utilities, and so that's going to be the focus of this particular segment. Now, when we look at servitudes, well, the definition by itself indicates subjection of one person to another person. But in the property sense, what we are dealing with is a particular property, immovable property, is now by default having to service somebody else's immovable property. So there are some provisions here from the French Civil Code, which I have outlined. Then there are also some provisions from the Estonian law in this regard. And I hope you can see in a comparative sense how they are quite similar. Some of the case laws in this particular chapter are from the UK or from the US. And again, the idea is to show to you how property law is quite similar all over the world. So when we look at servitudes, servitudes can have three primary functions, which are affirmative for using purposes, or restrictive, or obligations, which are affirmative. And then again, these are outlined in the lecture notes with better examples. And it all deals with how you can use your property and how you can force your neighbor to use his or her property, very often to your benefit. When we talk about servitudes, it's more or less based on agreements, and these are private agreements between parties, and based on these agreements, you have contracts and contractual obligations. And the important point, of course, is that a servitude is not restricted to or limited to just the person signing the agreement. The servitude goes with the land. And what this would imply is that even after the sale of the property, the new owner is bound by the agreements which were made by the previous owners. So that's a very important aspect to keep in mind, and that's important also from property law perspective, because These are not personal obligations, but rather these are some things that go with the property. And well, of course, servitudes are straightforward, and if everything works out fine, you can never have any problems. Everything is hunky dory. But that's not how a life really progresses. And then you always have legal disputes. You have people who are not happy with the way things are, and neighbors who do not agree or see eye to eye, and that's why you have litigation. So there are some provisions regarding right of way, which is very important, of course. And um, similarly, as in the French Civil Code, you have right of way. In the Estonian Property Act, you have access to public road. And a lot of these disputes would arise in case if you have any summer cottages or something, and that's out in the countryside where demarcations are not clear cut, property holdings are much bigger than in cities, and there is more scope for confusion and also friction when it comes to neighbors. There are different types of servitudes: continuous, discontinuous, apparent, and non apparent. So, again, these are some definitions with some examples which can help. Especially, there's a case law that comes later on about septic tank, and this is where these sort of definitions are very important, because sometimes you see something and so you know, okay, well, I need an access road, so this is a servitude. But sometimes it's not that straightforward and simple. You don't see it. Maybe it's an underground pipe or a cable, and maybe just a view. And so, of course, well, these are under different definitions. So, how do servitudes get established? Yes, this is a very important question, and it's something that is laid down either in the context of the law or common traditions, and these could include rights of way, the right to light, and things like that. Well, just as servitudes are established, and as is provided in the lecture notes, they can also be extinguished. With all sort of legal situations, you have the same issue. You can have legal remedies which are created and then which are extinguished. And so servitudes are extinguished when they are not used, or um, they are between two neighboring plots, but a person buys both of those plots. So, of course, then there is no such thing as a dominant um, property or a servient property, simply because now it's combined in the hands of one owner. So servitudes can be affirmative rights and negative rights, and this is where an important element comes in, which is known as an easement. And very often it is confused as being the same as a servitude, but yes, it's not the same. There are some legal differences that you have to be careful about. And well, a servitude relates to a servient estate, and an easement refers to the dominant estate. Again, these are definitions which have been looked at in the beginning. A servient estate is one which has to serve the interests of the neighbor who is dominant. And the examples will help you to see how it goes as well. Let's just say that there's a small piece of land and it's surrounded by a bigger plot of land. And so that person in the small piece of land needs to get access to the main road, and for that he or she needs to go through somebody else's property. So that small piece of land in the middle, that island of sorts, that's dominant. And the one through whose property they have to go through, well, that's the servient estate. So these are some examples which are laid out, and you can see them as well. Then comes problem one, which is about the particular issue that deals with the septic tank, and it's there in the lecture notes. I would strongly advise you to read these particular case laws. Well, it's an open book exam anyway, so shouldn't have an issue understanding what to find and where to find it. When it comes to negative rights, an interesting um, thing over here deals with the right to light. And this is a very important right, of course, because you can have houses, buildings in close proximity to each other, and because of their closeness, you have problems with regards to access to direct sunlight. And well, there are some requirements over here, especially under the English law, and this is a part of common law, and so the right to light is implied out over here. And what it says is if there are two houses of this height here, and so one house here has a window, and the other house is, well, on the other side, well, but doesn't block the sunlight. Now, if you want to increase the height of this house over here, and by doing that, you are restricting this person's windows right to light, direct light, then this person can, of course, make an objection to this, raise an objection, and say that you cannot increase the height of your house because his right to light is being affected. Well, yes, this would have been much more nicer to explain if I had the blackboard or the drawing board. But you get the idea, right? So if you read the notes, you will pretty much understand what I'm talking to about over here. What's important here is there's a time distinction, a limitation of sorts. It talks about 20 years. So when you read this, be careful that you pay attention to this requirement of 20 years uninterrupted enjoyment. Yeah, that's very important over here. And that's the aspect of servitudes. So we have looked at that in great detail. Let's take a break now, and the next lecture I will talk in the next lecture I will talk more about nuisances, because these are real problem areas, and there are a lot of case laws which are important over here. Until then, goodbye.